Okay, so we've written a function of type void, our intro function, which just did something, and we've written a function that returns a value, and we've written a function that accepts a value and does something. To review, when we ran our prompt user function, it prompted the user for an integer and then returned it, and we stored that in a variable called num. And if I entered an 8 was stored in num. And then on line 19, I'm going to call the check even odd function. I'm going to pass a copy to the function check even odd. And it will create a variable called n, and it will store a copy of num that's stored in the main function. And remember, these are two separate variables in memory. Num has scope to the main function, and n has scope to the check even odd function. Okay, and when check even odd is finished, this variable is actually removed, and that memory is deallocated and given back. So I'm going to show you a different way of passing a variable. This way is called pass by value, because we're passing a copy of the variable. And I'm going to show you how to pass by reference. When I pass a value by reference, I'm actually passing the address to that memory location. So the function will have direct access to that same variable that's being passed. In this example right here, I'm going to call prompt user, and I'm going to store the returned value into num. Well, I can pass num to prompt user and have that function update this variable directly. And so I'm going to go back to my prompt user function, and I'm going to tell this function that I'm going to pass an integer reference. So this ampersand means address. So this says I'm going to be passing the address to an integer variable, and then I'm just going to call it num. Well, actually, I'll call it n just to illustrate my point. And then this is going to be a void function. So I'm going to go ahead and change all of these. Take that out. I'm going to change this to n, and then I'm going to take that out. Okay, so let's go back up to our prototype, and I'm going to pass it an int reference and change the return type to void. Okay, so now instead of returning a value that will be stored into num, I'll just pass it the address of num, and the function can update it directly. So in memory, this is what it's going to look like. In main, I'm going to have a variable called num, and I'm going to pass num to prompt user. And then when you look at the prompt user header, you can see that it's being passed an address, and that address will be referred to as n while I'm in this function. So what I mean is it doesn't create another separate variable n in this function, but it will call this memory location n. So when I'm in prompt user function, this memory location will be referred to as n, and when I'm in main, the memory location will be referred to as num. So because I'm passing num by reference, I'm just giving that memory location a new name called n. And when I refer to n in this function, I'm actually referring to this memory location. So when the user enters an integer, let's say 8 is stored in num, and that is the variable in the main function. And that's called passing by reference. We've written functions two different ways to update num in main, right? We wrote a function, prompt user, that returned an integer value that we stored in num. That was the first way. We said num is assigned prompt user. And then the second way, we passed num by reference. And so prompt user had direct access to this variable, but in this function it was referred to as the name n, because that was the variable name that we declared in the function header.